Begin this hour with a closer look at the U.S. drone program, its effectiveness, and its future. New estimates released by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, the Long War Journal, and the New America Foundation are shedding light on just how expansive the unmanned aerial vehicle strikes have been since 2002. In all, there have been a total of 461 strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, resulting in some 3,520 deaths. Of the people killed, 457, or 11%, were civilians. Meanwhile, the Defense Department released its annual report on the use of unmanned systems. The report laid out a roadmap through 2038 of how the UAV program will continue to develop. Take a look at this chart. This is an inventory of the total number of unmanned aircrafts the Department of Defense currently has in its possession. And those are just the flying ones. The DoD also has thousands of ground and maritime systems. The agency estimates it will spend $4.1 billion on unmanned systems in 2014, a 30% drop from 2013, but still quite a bit of money. I spoke earlier with Abraham Wagner in Los Angeles. He is an adjunct professor at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, and also with Mary Ellen O'Connell. She is a professor of law and a research professor of international dispute resolution at the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. I began by asking Mary Ellen what she thought about these numbers.
Well, I'm very critical of this new statistic being released by the Council on Foreign Relations. It is simply misleading that there have only been 11% of all persons killed designated as civilians. This is simply incorrect. The only place where I go for statistics, and I am one of the experts, one of the people who has been tracking and looking into killings by drones since the very first one in Yemen outside in a combat zone in 2002, and I am a professor of international law. In my studies, I only look at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and I look at their low but also their high numbers. And the Bureau reports total numbers of 4,100 persons killed. That's the statistic we should be looking at. And even more importantly, we should focus as Americans on the number of 206. 206. That is the high number of children we may have killed. Those are the relevant statistics, and they should be reinforcing Americans' views that drone killings outside official, recognized, legal combat zones should come to an end.
And Abraham, what do you think about those numbers? I know the military would probably say that 11% of civilian casualties is relatively low. When you look at the effectiveness of these programs overall, that is that your sense of it?
No, it really isn't. I think that the number of casualties given the situation are fairly low. The 11%, and I agree with Mary, it's hard to, pick any particular source and say this number is right or that number is right, even if we accept the 4,000 number as a reasonable estimate, and we look at the 11% number in Zenko's report from the Council on Foreign Relations, that, it's an aggregate number. The number of civilian deaths, for example, if we look at the past 4 years in Pakistan, we're talking in the 1 to 3% range. If we're looking at Yemen, the numbers are much higher in the 14% range. But warfare is not sanitary. There really is no such thing as surgical strikes, and anytime you're engaged in warfare, there's going to be collateral damage. And it's highly unfortunate that the collateral damage often involves civilians, women, and children, but that's the nature of warfare. And the nature of warfare these days, as we've seen post 9/11, is not the same type of warfare we faced in decades prior. They are not declared wars. They're not necessarily official wars. And, I'm a law professor as well at Columbia, also at UCLA. And when we teach the law of war, the sort of things we're teaching are old wars. We're in a new environment and a new regime.
Now, Mary Ellen, you kind of touched on it before, but one of the problems is the classification of what exactly a militant is. A militant is defined as all military-aged males in a strike zone, regardless of whether or not they participated in combat activities. Could the civilian death toll be even higher than you estimate or than this report estimates, given that classification?
Well, I have to disagree with Abraham when he said that we're in a new kind of warfare and therefore the way we classify people has to change. Under international law, the definitions in the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, the definition of who is a civilian and who is a combatant, who may lawfully be killed in combat and who may not lawfully intentionally be killed in combat has not changed. And the United States is fully on board with the definitions under international law. And under those definitions, there are few, if any, of the people that the United States has killed in Yemen, Pakistan, and Somalia who are legally defined as combatants. And those are the only people we may intentionally kill. Abraham is talking about the dirtiness of war and collateral damage, but outside of an armed conflict zone, and we're talking about Yemen, Pakistan, and Somalia, none of those persons should have been killed under armed conflict rules. They perhaps could be killed in the attempt to arrest them, resisting arrest under peacetime law enforcement rules, but we haven't been invited to do any of that kind of arrest in any of these countries. So let's be clear, under international law, which is the law that binds the United States and all countries resorting to military force, 4,000 people killed is an unacceptable, unlawful, and reprehensible number, and it should end.
Abraham, do you want to respond to that?
I don't agree. We've selectively decided to ignore international law and these definitions since 9/11 when it suits our desire to do so. The kinds of definitions that are contained in those conventions are antiquated. The people that took out 30-some civilians in the last couple of days in Russia were not following these rules. The activities we've been engaged in post 9/11 don't necessarily follow these rules and these definitions. And I probably agree with the Council on Foreign Relations and probably with Mary Ellen that these definitions are in fact antiquated. You're not going to find the people that seek to do us harm, that seek to kill Americans, qualifying under antiquated definitions. And as Seiko says in the piece, these definitions need to be modernized and changed. This is not the nature of foreign policy today. We made a decision as a nation following 9/11 and something called the Bush Doctrine, to go after terrorists who seek to do us evil and those who support them wherever they may be. We haven't changed that doctrine and continue to operate under that. So long as we do that, these definitions don't apply.
The doctrine that doctrine Abraham is talking about is a unilaterally imposed political view of the Bush administration. This is not what President Obama was talking about in May of this year, last year, 2013, when he said the United States would comply with international law. He did not say that these were antiquated rules. His lawyers and he tried to shove what they were doing into the accepted current rules of international law. They didn't talk about antiquated rules. So I'm afraid Abraham's view about the United States' position on international law is incorrect. We have not sought to change the rules. We have just sought to evade analysis of the actual facts of what the United States is doing. And that's, I assume, why there's so little official U.S. commentary on to justify under international law these killings. Let's take a very recent example.
Mary Ellen, let me jump in there. Abraham, the DOD's report says it is reducing the amount of money it spends on unmanned technology. Is that a good sign in your opinion?
I think it's a bad sign. The one thing I think most people will agree on is that unmanned vehicles or drones, and I guess the new term that the Defense Department is calling them non-piloted aircraft, these things save lives and they save money. One of the great numbers which we need to focus on is that since we've started military operations in the tribal areas, places like Waziristan, which are horribly inhospitable, we have lost absolutely no American lives in aircraft.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there, Abraham. We're just out of time. This is a wonderful discussion, one that needs to continue. Mary Ellen O'Connell, a professor of law at the University of Notre Dame in New York, and Abraham Wagner, adjunct professor at Columbia University in Los Angeles.